Leftover lasagna.
Leftover lasagna.
Lasagna? No way.
It's a type of sandwich.
Some kind of gross pasta.
Leftover lasagna is a
podcast
hosted by
my
Nitin
church
Sundar and Tony Uncle. Leftover lasagna.
Very funny name.
Hello and welcome to Leftover Lasagna, the wannabe weekly podcast that poses a bunch of questions without bothering about the answers. This is the podcast that puts the fun in confounding, the doubt in fuck around and find out, and the WTF in SMT WTFS, the 7 days of the calendar. If life is a trip, which some think of as a destination and others think of as a journey, leftover lasagna is the veritable security check at the airport. We ask uncomfortable questions. You have no idea why we're doing what we're doing. It takes about an hour, and the best way to go through it is to laugh at the absurdity of everything. I am Tony, the man they call Goose, because I tend to be silly and go on wild chases. And joining me is our main pilot, the man from whom women clamor for maverick pics, the tomcat who's always in cruise control. Say hi, Nitin Sundar.
Hey Tony, you said something about life being a journey or something, right? It's a good time to talk about journeys and destinations. We are 36 hours away from Tony flying away to Australia. Interesting times for leftover lasagna and lots of action down under.
This is fun.
So, how are you bracing for your upcoming trip, Tony?
It's interesting, right? So one of the themes that I've been seeing on social media is that people are saying that August has slipped by, right? And I'm like, wait, my August hasn't slipped by at all. It has been like very, very eventful. Obviously, this whole Australia thing has taken a different turn, which is now going there for a few weeks as opposed to for life itself as of now, and then we'll see how things work out. The whole point being, but at other points in time, years have flitted by, right? And there is apparently a theory around this, right? And people think that as you grow older, what tends to happen is that obviously your 1 month is in relation to the life that you've lived is a shorter duration, right? So, and that's not the actual answer. The actual answer is that you tend to follow a set routine once you grow older, and therefore the brain stops making new memories, and this is why time flies by much faster when you're adulting, apparently. And so apparently the way to make sure time doesn't fly by is to try and do new things or have interesting things happen to you, which has basically been my August, and which is why it has not flown away.
Oh, so that's good then overall. And here's to more memories being built.
But on the last episode, we mentioned Kurt Vonnegut, and one of his friends is obviously Joseph Heller, whose book you love, Nitin. And they have a famous shared quote, right? So basically, they were both at a billionaire's house, and Kurt Vonnegut turns to Joseph Heller and says, what you made out of Catch 22 in your entire life, this guy makes in 1 day. And Joseph Heller basically says that I have something that he will never have. And Kurt Vonnegut is like, what is that? And Joseph Heller is like, enough, right? So that is their common shared quote. But why I brought up Catch 22 is that, Nitin, you know the characters better than me. There is some, I think it's Dunbar, no? Dunbar is a character who wants to prolong life by making time pass as slowly as possible. So he wants to do the most boring things so that he feels like that is another way to go about it, right? Obviously, Catch 22 set during the World War II, and people are not sure how long they'll live. And it is a beautifully absurd book, right? So that's another philosophy that you can adopt.
Fantastic book. My favorite characters from Catch 22 are Milo Minderbender, who is the, I think he's the cook, and he has a grand plan to outsource, export and make arbitrage on, I think, cotton candy and various other things that he's making. It's been about 20 years, close to 20 years since I read that book, which means though it is one of my favorite books, I've forgotten large parts of it. But this is interesting, right? Because of the amount of content that's being created around us all the time, we don't go back and revisit old content anymore, right? In general. If I think about growing up days, it wasn't easy to watch movies, right? Now you can open up some app and any movie that you want to watch is probably available online for you to watch. And there is more and more content being created. Everything is available at your fingertips immediately. wasn't the case when
Right.
we were kids. So we used to go back and rewatch the same movie like several times. There are some movies that I've watched hundreds of times. I'm sure it's the same with you as well. And it's
Yeah.
the same with books and TV shows, right? We don't go back and revisit great content. It's something that I've consciously tried to start doing, as we spoke last week about Mahesh Enter Pratikaram, and I, of course,
Right.
went and rewatched that movie. Maybe it's time for me to reread Catch 22 and
Catch
other
22.
great books.
Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise you don't even remember the stuff that was good. Most of the content that's being created is not good, so you might as well go back and savor the actual good
Yeah.
stuff.
So Catch 22 is an interesting book, right? Because I've finished it only one time, but I've started it many times. Like I think first time I picked it up was in 11th or 12th standard. And then I read some part. Then I forgot everything that I'd read. Then I start from
Yeah.
the beginning all over again. This went on for
Yeah.
several years until I
Yeah.
think post B school or something, I finally finished the book. But amazing book. In that
Yeah,
sense,
indeed.
I don't even think like, we need to complete things anymore, right? We've strongly espoused that sunk cost fallacy is very real. That
Yeah,
just because you started a movie or a book doesn't mean you have to read it through if you're not enjoying it. So
absolutely.
both
Yeah.
apply, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially so true for long TV shows, right? Which go on for hours and
Yeah.
hours and hours. And people just plod through them because they've started and they're not able to, get over the sunk cost fallacy. It's really sad.
Now, when we check our analytics at this point in time, we'll see a large drop off from this episode of Leftover Lasagna because we've told people that just because you've started listening to this episode doesn't mean you have to complete it. So we've sort of shot ourselves in the foot.
But what this means is people will actually go back and listen to episodes that they liked in the past or
Oh,
re-listen to episodes that
okay.
they liked. So it's all good. Eventually, it
Citation
all
needed.
helps.
Today's topic, I think, is around money or something. I don't know. You have brought the topic, but I wanted to sort of stick with the theme of flying and World War II. There are multiple things that seemed like a small step for man, but a giant leap for mankind. Right. First and most obvious is landing on the moon in 1969. Okay, and the fun part here is that obviously the Russians had taken the quantum leap on, space flight and all of that. First, they sent the dog, and then Yuri Gagarin and stuff like that. And then basically the US wanted to catch up, right? And actually, then they figured that the only way to catch up is to send a manned mission to the moon because it is like several notches of difficulty higher that what the
Yeah.
Russians have done so far won't matter. And the
Hmm.
person who actually was asked and said this to Kennedy was a very controversial character called Werner von Braun. Okay,
Oh,
he
okay.
was basically a Nazi who was responsible for developing the deadliest rockets and missiles, which actually wreaked havoc during World War II. Right, and finally. Once the war ended, he surrendered, and the US and Russia by then were very, very cautious of the new world order, right? So they basically captured all the German scientists who they could use and put them to good use, right? And Werner von Braun was one of the critical guys behind the moon landing. So if you
Right.
think about it, Neil Armstrong has direct correlation to some guy from Nazi Germany, right? And one of the most influential guys in Nazi Germany. The other quantum leap is world hunger has in large parts been solved by one man, right? And his name is Fritz Haber,
Harbor.
um,
Yeah.
who figured out the what is it, the nitrogen cycle,
Yeah.
how to
Yeah.
basically make bread from air, as it is called, right? Nitrogen
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
abundant in the atmosphere, so how do you ensure that it gets into
Into the
fertilizers, and how
soil
do you,
and yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
how do you grow plants? And he basically figured that out, and that has made sure that like world hunger is not so much of an issue anymore, right?
Yeah.
Everything grew abundantly post that. But the interesting part here is that Fritz Haber again was one of the guys who, he was again German, I think World War One, and is responsible for creating the deadly gas,
Poison
right?
gas.
Is it
Yeah.
chlorine or poison gas? And so much so that his first wife actually committed suicide because he was
Yeah.
involved in all of these things. And his invention actually ended up creating Cyclone B, right, which was used in concentration camps later and all of that. And so, like, sketchy history again, but what he's given is something tremendous, right? Like world hunger,
Yeah.
very interesting gray part. Which brings us to the third guy, is someone called John Law. Okay, he's a Scottish fellow who was in England and apparently was a drunk, degenerate gambler and went into a duel with someone, ended up killing him, was convicted of murder, then escaped jail somehow and went to Paris. Okay, and basically this guy started gambling there. At which time the king, in this is the 16th or 17th century, right? I think early 1700s. Yeah. So this guy basically went around Paris, started gambling, and won a lot. And at this time, the king was a 5-year-old, right? I think Louis 15 or something, which meant that
Okay.
all the decisions were made by the Duke of Orleans or Duke of Orleans, and who in turn was a party animal. And basically, this guy called John Law suggested that instead of using gold and silver for money, you can switch to paper money. And realistically, he created the first national bank in
Oh,
France.
really?
And instead of using gold and silver, he started using paper money. The Duke made sure that everybody in France started using paper money. And then he went one step higher to say, look, you have so many trading these things with the US. I want a share of that, right? So realistically created the first startup, and he created the Mississippi Company and created a new town which he named after his friend, the Duke, which is New Orleans, right?
Okay.
And the idea was that you would set up large trade companies there, etc., and to reduce France's government debt, he basically said, look, invest in this company and pay for it with government bonds, right, which the government is anyway not going to pay you back for. And so this went on well, lots of people invested, huge startup bubble happened till one day someone made a run on the bank and everything fell through, right? So he created paper money and he caused the first financial crisis as well. So yeah, crazy, evil slash degenerate people creating things of
Yeah.
value, right? Like today such a thing won't happen because too big to fail. Obviously, this guy was caught, not caught, Scott, and he somehow managed to escape. Right?
Oh, so Law caught up with John Law.
Law, the long arm of the law, caught up with John Law.
And he did not go scot free. He was caught, so he did not go scot free. Yeah.
Exactly. But before that, how he ended up doing this whole scam was that then he said, like, if you want to return your government bonds or shares in this company, I'm not going to pay you back in gold or silver. And at some point, he said the value of this is actually half now, right? Like one of those platforms like Vasir X in crypto, basically deciding to socialize losses, right? Yeah, but the point was then he escaped, he ran away. And so I wanted to check if this was the origin of the word scot free.
Scot free.
Right?
Okay.
But
There you
it's
go.
not. And it turns out scot free actually comes from a Norwegian language or something where scot means tax and scot free basically means people who didn't have to pay tax.
Lovely, lovely. Nicely teased the topic for the day, which is money. And again, like most of the topics that we choose on Leftover Lasagna, every single topic itself could be a podcast with 100 episodes.
Yeah. So are you saying we should call each of these episodes 101 and then keep it going?
And it's LOL. LOL, if you write it, in small letters, looks like 101.
Beautiful.
Also.
There
Amazing.
you go. Yeah.
But I'll go back to the earlier statement you made, which is the famous anecdote involving Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, right? Which is about money and about having enough, which takes us back to this topic that we want to talk about. So I have this revolutionary idea, which probably is not original, but is something that came to me in the last few days, which is that money is the new gene. Okay.
Money is the new
And
gene.
money is the new gene, GENE genes.
Oh.
That's the new way in which we kind of try and code our genetics. And I have a long-winded logic for why I make this
Let's
statement,
go.
right? So let me say this,
Please.
right? So evolution works in a fairly simple way, right? So if you think about it, every living thing in every species figures out a way to get stronger, more adaptive to their surroundings. And by getting stronger, they either become better at finding prey or it not becoming prey, right? For millions of years, this is how evolution continued and continues to function for all species except one, right? And that one species, of course, is our own, because we have kind of hacked our way out of how evolution works. And the way evolution sort of panned out over a period of time was you would propagate by gradually weeding out weaker individuals and multiplying so that the stronger individuals would promote better into the future. And hence, over a period of time, your species doesn't die out. And if anything, actually becomes stronger and more adaptive to live through the rigors of human evolution, right? If you look at it, at some stage, we hacked our way out of this cycle of evolution. And we did that by making changes to our surroundings. Firstly, it was by trying and manipulating nature the way it was around us. And the most primitive ways in which we used to do this was getting shelter, building houses, maybe getting clothes, etc., which is what, by the way, other animals also do. Like if you look at a bird that builds its nest, it is kind of making something out of what is available already in nature and manipulating it to some extent, right? But gradually, the orders of magnitude or the complexity of the manipulation that human race did to nature started increasing, right? Quite significantly. We slowly started making tools out of stones, out of rocks, out of metals, etc. We figured out how to create fire, and we started using fire to manipulate our surroundings even further. So the order of magnitude, the complexity of how we were fiddling with our surroundings just kept getting better, right? And then came the third step, which was the big step, which was where we started manipulating other living things around us, right? It wasn't just manipulating things that were non-living, but the giant step forward, we invented, so to speak, agriculture, animal husbandry, right? Which broadly livestock management. For the first time ever, you had a species that was capable of creating its own food and naturally, right? So we were actually rearing animals and plants which otherwise would not have existed, just for the fact that we needed them to eat. And this was one great way to hack out of the cycle of having to go and hunt for food, or forage for food.
You're
Like you said,
saying that other animals existed in a disagree culture and humans created agree culture.
oh my god, amazing, amazing. Yeah, disagree and commit atrocities to other species. Yeah, disagree and commit. Yeah. And then we obviously got into the phase where we could manipulate our environment, non-living things in our environment, in extremely complicated ways, which was the industrial revolution, where we managed to build out machines, etc. Like really, if you think about it, a second or third order derivative of what we did in the Stone Age was really the manufacturing era, right? Now, what happened with each stage of this?
When did division of labor happen?
When did
So if you
division
think
of
of
labor
an
happen?
animal versus human, an animal has to do everything for itself, right? Human is probably the only species where you rely on others to do a bunch of other things and you do only one thing, right?
No, this is interesting, right?
So
So if you look at animals also, animals also collaborate, right? Of course, they don't collaborate to the same extent as, say, the human beings do. But if you look in the wild, right? We spoke about ants in the last episode. Ants collaborate all the time. If you look at even more, bigger species, as this famous Masai Mara crossing that happens, right? Which is millions of wildebeest are trying to cross a river, and they know that the only way they can cross and survive is if they do it in big numbers. So they're literally collaborating and saying some of us are going to be collateral damage, and we are okay with that because that's our only odds, which is also a form of collaboration, right? So human beings, of course, are able to collaborate at a completely different order of magnitude. But what happened through each of these phases, right? And by the time we started manufacturing our own food, which is literally what agriculture was, our challenges are not the same as what they were for any of the other species out there, right? We moved right to the top of the food chain. There is no other species that's going to attack us, and there is any food that we want is available to us, and we are able to store it, we're able to manipulate it. We don't typically die of starvation the way other species potentially can. So our challenges of evolution really became very, very different beyond a point. And I would say at some stage, unlike every other species, who are really threatened by other species, and hence their reason to evolve is to be safer or stronger than other species. The only threat to the human civilization over a period of time came from other human beings, right? And the only way, if you were to go back to the logic of how, when you are threatened by another species or when you're threatened by another group, the way you get stronger is by your genes becoming stronger. There was really no way for human beings to differentiate and become stronger than other human beings, because genetically that's not going to happen, because we all share the same genes, right? So it's not like we can go out there and get better than other human beings who potentially become our other threat, right? Like for whatever resources, etc., that we want to garner out there. Money is one of those stories which we now have a new proxy for a gene, because there is no way for me to establish my power or strength over another human being genetically or using what is naturally given to me. So I'm going to artificially come up with this new construct, which is going to become the proxy for power propagation and superiority, or coming up with orders of, let's say, classification, right? The ways in which power structures can be kind of imposed across the species. I don't know if I did a good job of articulating it, but TLDR is
Yeah.
that we cease to have to rely on our genes to get better beyond a stage, because we took so total control of our environment, of food, and
Yeah.
of our threats, that
Yeah.
we now are living in a, and I wouldn't want to comment whether this is for good or for bad, or for better or for worse, right? If there are infinite probabilities that exist and infinite paths that could have been followed, the path that results in one species becoming super intelligent and so strong and then creating its own laws probably is, going to play out in one of those universes, right? And we are living there. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's for better or for worse. It is obviously for the better of the human race, at least that's what you would say. Right, with
Right.
every passing year or every passing decade, life is getting better on average for everybody. And there's this thing that people say: the richest person from 200 years back, compared to the very, very average person who's living today, had a far worse life. And that really is
Yeah.
proof that overall things are better for the human race. Maybe not better for the planet itself, because more species are going extinct every year compared to they ever used to. And in most cases it's because of human beings and not because of nature itself having an impact on them. But that's where we are, and that's my thought. Yeah.
I think essentially what we're saying is animals live and maybe work together in hordes, and human is the only species that can hoard, HOARD, right? Like
Yeah.
by virtue of inventing something like agriculture, or therefore it also meant that you needed place to store grain, etc. We created a place where you can store for the future, which
Yeah.
meant that unlike other animals, you're not necessarily living for today. You are
Yeah.
considering the future also, right?
Not just the storing, right? In fact,
Yeah.
the if you look at the cycle of how humans have gradually become better and stronger and smarter all the time, right? Everything, the invention of fire,
Yeah.
or rather the ability to start fire, not the invention of fire, what am I saying, but the invention of the wheel, right? The ability to
Yeah.
transport through long distances, which animals cannot do unless they physically become capable of traveling long distances. And obviously agriculture, storage, everything is just de-risking the environment, right? Ultimately that's what we have achieved. Yeah.
Correct. No, so my point was that the idea that you can hoard or store has directly resulted into money becoming the most important thing, right? Because money ultimately is the simplest store of value, right? and
Yeah.
and it
Correct.
doesn't even have to be like physical notes or gold
Yeah.
coins, unless you're Uncle Scrooge and you love swimming in that thing. Right now money
This is how this is how genes propagate, by being very, very persistent.
and again, going back to an earlier episode when I said capitalism is the new religion, right? It
Yeah.
shares an interesting trait in that realistically, if you think about money we use today, the more you think about it, the less it makes sense, right? Because it
Yeah.
is ultimately fugazi, as you call it. Like it really doesn't exist physically, and if you question the structures that are, it might fall apart
Yep.
anytime, right? Because there is
Yeah.
nothing physical that is backing it. So in that sense, it is invisible. Like
Yeah.
it works only because everyone believes in
Yeah.
it. If everyone stops believing in it,
Yeah.
it can fall apart very readily, right? No, but to your earlier point, what I meant was that therefore, once you discovered storage and you were looking at more and more efficient ways of storing for the future and transmitting it to your future generations, right? Which is
Correct.
why property is the only reason why marriage exists as a structure, right? And realistically, if you think about how marriage is passed on over the years and how matchmaking used to happen, it was just a way for wealthy slash rich people to pass on property to future generations, right? And all
Yeah.
matchmaking up till recently happened in that manner.
Correct.
And therefore you created something like class and caste structures to say, how do we make sure that my tribe or my family or my genes, in that
Yes.
sense, continue to get richer, right?
And all of these, right? Any dominant power structure, and this might sound a bit crude, but male versus female, for instance, right? Over a period of time, there is more wealth in the hands of men than in the hands of women, right? Generally, this is true in the world around, and men earn more than women because that is one way in which that particular subtype has managed to use money to garner more power and manipulate the world more and more in its own favor. Now, you can apply this logic to every different type of structure that exists in the human race, right? Take caste, take religion, take developed world versus underdeveloped world. Every one of these sort of classifications is founded on the back of who has more money, which group has more money, because the group that has more money exerts more power, right? Ultimately. See, the reality is also this, right? Like when it comes to genetic advantages, they accrue slowly over a large period of time, right? And eventually sort of
True.
show, right? True. We have created structures where, by and large, that is true for money also, right? Yeah, you can say that capitalism, allows anybody to come up and, break the cycle of poverty. It happens in very, very exceptional cases that people actually manage to do that. Ultimately, money creates more money, and this is the reality, right? Sure, you can with your enterprise and hard work move up the totem pole to some extent, but by and large that's not the reality, right? The power structures exist and continue to exist, and and if you really look at how genes propagated over a period of time, right? And we spoke about this in our previous episode, and when people tell us that their grandparents were extremely healthy, right, as opposed to the way we are now.
I edited this out from last.
Okay, so I'll bring it back. This time I'm the editor.
I edited it out because you made the ridiculous assertion that we used to be healthier in the past.
I'm going to make it again.
I was trying to save your face, but okay.
No. Wait, we are here because we can make provocative
ridiculous
claims.
assertion.
I think it needs to be couched in a little bit more of debate, right? I'm not trying to say for once that we are less healthier than we used to be, say 200, 300, 500 years ago, which is not true, right? The average lifespan of the human being has increased, right? Which can only mean one thing. It means that we are healthier. But if you look at, we have what, 7 billion, 8 billion people now on the planet, and people generally
8 billion.
We have overcome a lot of our big challenges, right? Infant mortality, for instance, or lots of the simple communicable diseases that used to kill us. Cholera, whatever, malaria. These are things that used to be death sentences. Right?
AIDS,
HIV, yeah. These all used to be death sentences, and they are not anymore. We have found scientifically, we have found ways to fight against a lot of the things that potentially could kill us, which is true. What this though means is a lot of people, a lot of human beings who might not have survived, a simple kind of ailment 200 years back, are able to survive and continue to live right now.
Correct.
Right? And if, I don't know, what is the world population like 200 years back? Was it 1 billion? Whatever it was.
Yeah, whatever it was.
Right? There were lots of, you just didn't have so many people surviving. Lots of people were just dying out young. The 1 billion that survived and came through were actually very strong and very, very capable of surviving in a very hostile environment, because they were able to survive all these extremely fatal diseases. What we have now, though, is 8 billion people who managed to survive thanks to science, thanks to where we are. Generally not as healthy as the 1 billion who existed back then were. Right? That's the argument I was trying to make.
Yeah,
so it's obviously a flawed argument. It's a flawed argument in the sense, and I can see why it is flawed. But you can see what I'm trying to say as well, right? You understand what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
Yeah, your point is that two things, right? There is a survivorship bias to the general observation that we make that people used to be healthier back in the day. And when you point out to your grandparents living to 100, for instance, if you probably look at their siblings or cousins, a lot of them would have passed away in their 30s or 40s, etc., which doesn't happen. And therefore, on average, today, obviously, your lifespan is around 70 in India, and it's only going to increase. And therefore, your point is that whoever lived to 100 then was probably hardy, right? But my point is that more number of such people exist in our population today, right? Like you can't point out to them because that is the new normal, right? You don't
But
expect people to pass away very early.
fair. But if you take the longer time scale and say if the human race continues to have this mix of people that we currently have, the strength of the genes, right, the natural genes that are getting propagated generation upon generation is actually getting weaker in that sense.
That's
Because
not true, no. See, for
it is,
for instance, we've just gone through COVID, right? Or
yeah,
like whatever Black Plague or whatever used to happen back then, which used to wipe out, or Spanish flu or whatever, wrong word, but whatever, used to wipe
yeah,
out half the population, right? And
correct.
currently, with the advance of science plus how we sort of operate, the death toll of something like COVID is massively reduced, right?
No,
Now, your point may be
you're
that
right,
it is
right? So we
science
have,
that is right. Yeah.
no, you're right. We have become, no. Science is human, right? At the end of the day, what is science?
Yeah.
Science is nothing but a manifestation of the human brain, which
Correct.
has gotten to this place by going through these cycles of evolution only. I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment. It's nothing more than that. I'm not debating that where we are now is obviously better for the human race than it was for
Right.
than what it
Right.
was earlier. But I'll definitely say it is much worse though for the planet, and much worse for nature, and much worse for every other species that exists. And I don't think you can argue with that.
George Carlin has already said this very pithily, right? Like, what do you mean save the planet, save the planet? The
Yeah,
planet has existed here for billions of years before us. It will continue to exist for billions of years after us. The
true,
planet is fine. Humans are fucked, right? Like, there is a huge difference, right?
which is
Like,
true. Yeah,
therefore,
and because of the
therefore,
humans,
but
hundreds of other species are also fucked, which is just what it is.
yeah,
It's just an observation. Yeah,
yeah, no. So to tie your 2 or 3 points together, one is around survivorship bias, which is what we do when we say grandparents used to be healthier, etc. The same also applies to hustle can make you rich, right? Or the
yeah,
American dream in that sense, which is completely flawed.
yeah,
And to your point, which is that money makes more money, right? And
yeah,
compounding is very very real, and the effects are uh, crazy, right? And
yeah.
if you look around you, the only people who are millionaires, the statistically significant, or like probably 95% plus of them are millionaires because their parents were millionaires, and
Yeah.
generations before that, and you selected out families to propagate that, right? And that point I agree with. I buy.
Even if you look at the people who break through and say become millionaires now because they went to elite institutions and they
Yeah.
got into great jobs, or they started up and got successful, even those people started with enough of social capital to be able to run that race in their life, which
Yeah.
majority of people actually don't have access to, right? So yeah,
And the other point, which I also agree with, when you say money is a new gene, is that it literally is, because right now you're into biohacking, right? Like, I'm guessing Ozempic is the biggest example of what we are doing with our bodies, right? Where um, it was, I think, introduced as a drug for diabetes, but now like weight loss is a
yeah,
side effect or something that happens because
yeah,
of it, which means you are actually making yourself look more biologically attractive by hacking your body because you have access to money, basically, right? Like, you obviously had the I don't know, Botox
correct,
or Brazilian butt lifts of the world, but it's
yeah,
basically gone to the next level where you're
yeah,
saying that you can actually live to 110 or 120 uh, because science is advancing rapidly, and the people who get first access to this will obviously be people with money. So
correct,
I buy
yeah.
that point.
There's an interesting kind of subversion, right, where people
Yeah.
use money, which we have now classified as the new gene, to go back and hack what in the older world, in a pre-money world, would have been, the right kind of selection advantage. For instance, good
Hmm.
looks, right? Now,
Agreed.
typically, when people mate, right, or when this is true for all species, including the human species, you would try and mate to the
Yes, Nitin.
healthiest
Tell
looking.
us, how do people mate? Finally
Well,
reached
first,
your area of expertise.
first you go and stand outside the toilet of the opposite gender. No, scratch that.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Please put two flowers kissing here as reference, because like We also
That
don't
reminds
want to
me,
be an exclusionary podcast.
one of those movie taglines from way into the past that has stuck with me is the Aliens movie tagline. Do you remember the tagline for Aliens? I've not even watched the movie, but I
There is a
remember the
movie
tagline.
called Aliens.
Either
Like,
the Spielberg film.
was
No?
this when the writer's strike happened? We've made the movie, but we don't have a name. And the writers have gone on strike. What shall we call this movie? What is the movie about? Aliens. Okay, that shall be the title of the movie. What? How is the movie named Aliens? It's like leftover lasagna episode titled Money. Money, like just that.
I think Aliens is a decent name for a film. But anyway,
Like,
I mean,
why?
SEO optimized, man. What more do you need? Yeah. This movie
I
is
would
about
argue to the
aliens.
contrary.
Yeah. What the hell is Deadpool?
I mean,
Like-
don't get me started on superhero movies. That's an entirely separate podcast.
I believe it was a Steven Spielberg movie. I've never watched Aliens, right? Not my kind of movie, but the tagline is something that has stuck with me. Hope they never meet, pray they never mate. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm not sure if this was the tagline for Aliens or for Species. It was one of those two movies. But the only thing I remember is the tagline. This is the problem. The branding was so good that you've forgotten the brand. You only remember the branding.
Is this a Steven Spielberg theme that like the names of movies are like so random? Is Species also a Spielberg film?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think so. E.T. was also Spielberg. Yeah, you're right. As was Jaws. But Jaws is a good name though. I like Jaws.
Yeah, Jaws.
He didn't go with
Yeah.
he didn't go with sharks. Yeah, there you go. No, so like I was saying, typically living things mate with pairs. When they're looking for pairs, they're looking for the most likely individual that is likely to either provide great genes or provide protection to the genes and ensure sort of healthy birth, right? When the male is looking at the female, right? This is what it used to be, which is why peacock tries to dance and attract its its consorts, because it wants to say, I have all these beautiful attributes which will be passed on to your offspring if you mate with me, right? And typically men have this predilection for women with certain physical endowments, largely because it's hardwired into men.
What, really?
That the pelvic bone, right?
Childbearing hips is what you're saying.
Childbearing hips, yeah, exactly. Yeah. This line, of course, became viral, right, after Animal came out, a movie which you refused to watch, though I strongly recommended it to you. Yeah, because the hero Ranbir Kapoor actually goes and tells this girl that you're very desirable because you have good childbearing hips. People are like, how can he say something like this? But yeah, this is, whether he says it or not, this is how mating happens, because this is what people look at and this is what they react to. But yeah,
you mean
true.
Subconsciously, right?
No, even very consciously, right? Like there is a reason why men are attracted to certain body types of women.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I will provide a factual counter. Then, therefore, your beauty trends would mirror that. And
They do.
Clearly, that's not the case, right? No, come on. The trend is towards anorexia and on the extreme, right?
No.
It's towards like a petite kind of
Petite
slim
with good.
kind of body.
This is going somewhere else. No, but slim doesn't mean.
No, okay. My whole point is that what is the vital statistics of a Barbie?
Exactly, because and why do you think the hourglass figure exists? Because you want a slim middle, but you want a big top
you
and a big
already
bottom.
knew the answer. What is the answer?
Oh, 36, 24, 36, right? 36, 24, 36 remains, and the preference for the hourglass figure is not reduced. If anything, you want an even more drastic hourglass. This is not making the pod, by the way. Me explaining this random shit to you.
Why? No. Barbie is, yeah, you're right. It's 36, 18, 33. Okay, fair
Which
enough.
is worse
So
than
you're
36,
saying
24,
even,
36. Yeah.
Yeah, of course it's worse. I mean, even while we are looking at a petite kind of thing, the evolutionary preference towards something like childbearing hips or ample bosoms to feed the child
is still being taken care of. Yeah, our interest in petiteness doesn't let go of our pettiness. Let's put it that way.
Pettiness.
But
okay.
And this is an interesting thought experiment, right? Given where we are now, if you were to have like a a pairing ritual, right, like on Tinder or whatever, would a woman go for a man with 10x the bank balance, but not really endowed with the best, let's say, looks, because there's only so much that you can see on Tinder, as opposed to a woman who would go for, say, a handsome hunk with all the musculature, etc., but with no job prospects, whatever.
True.
with a very average kind of bank balance, etc. Who is the woman actually going to go for? And the answer might have been different in the pre-capitalism era. It is likely very different now, right? Because your chance of propagating genes well into the future are much stronger, I would argue, if you pair with someone who has the modern gene, which is a lot of money, as opposed to the traditional gene, which is the traditional gene.
Yeah. No, I just want to contextualize what you're saying here, right? And which is that I don't think at an individual level humans are always that calculating, right? However, I think what you're trying to say is that under our rational decision making, there are subliminal cues which you act upon, right?
True.
So obviously, why you like a person versus another cannot objectively be explained, right?
Yeah.
And in the past, that was like, huge, big physique or whatever. Now you're saying it is more money, even if it's not a stated kind of thing.
Who's saying it's not stated? I mean, we are from India, right? We know the concept of arranged marriage in India. And, where the Bharat Matrimony ads, typically people are looking exactly for this because they're asking for someone with a salary of X, someone from a community of Y, or someone with a certain education background, which again is a proxy for, earning power, etc.
Correct.
So it's very explicit.
That is a marketplace, no? That is very different from
what is a marketplace?
Interactions in the wild, as it were.
But the marketplace is a manifestation of interactions in the wild. Yeah.
I'll tell you a very different example. Is that a lot of matchmaking happens in colleges, right? And so technically, if you were looking at, let us say, for instance, that IMK in your estimation is like 3 notches below IMA, right? In that case, like a girl from IMK would be looking at a guy from IMA. Right?
Oh my God.
Whereas my point is that most of the matches get made because of proximity rather than anything else. Right? Lots of people get married during college times because like they spend time together, right? Or
you do realize you're right, of course, and there is obviously chemistry that builds with proximity. But you realize that proximity is also a form of self-selection, right?
No, see, there are different passes, right? It could be coincidence also. If like in the past you spent all your life in one village, it didn't matter that what education levels were there, wealth levels were there, etc. You fell in love because like whatever, right? And that's why you saw a lot of.
No, you're right. Let me clarify. I'm not like this. I'm not saying that true love does not exist. Let's please be clear, right?
No, I'm saying true love doesn't exist.
Oh fuck. Okay.
I am saying true love doesn't exist. I am saying that it is just a function of proximity at a particular point in time.
That is only true love, Dad. Hey, like obviously you can't have telepathic connection with a human being in other corner of the world. No, it has to be with someone you interact with only.
No, that is not the point. I am saying that. Therefore, are you considering true love right when you get married or true love over a period of a lifetime? Both are very different things.
I am saying when people mate.
Yeah.
What is marriage? What is marriage? Marriage is a proxy for finding a partner to sleep with. That's what it is, right? Like
no, marriage is.
You're talking from a socio-political. I'm talking from an evolutionary perspective. What is monogamy, right? You're ultimately that's what you're looking to do. Ultimately, you're trying to find a way.
Bringing a child into the world is the propagated genes. Fine.
That's the only reason why everything else is window dressing, right? At the end of the day, you could argue that human beings are hacking our way out of.
Wait. You have to clarify. Is it window dressing or undressing? You said it is
window undressing.
Please move away from the window. Let me undress you. This is, in your estimation, what?
Is.
Okay, fair.
No, see, at our genetic coding, while we have been hacking with our genetic coding so much. One thing we have not yet managed to hack out of, and maybe I don't know if it's good or bad, is that we still want to propagate our genes, right, into the future.
Correct.
And the choice. I mean, it's obviously changing. There are people. I mean, there are entire countries that are going into population decline right now.
Correct.
Right, and there are entire countries where, like our country, where you're like, what the hell? Why is it so crowded? So you have both extremes, but as a race, we are still trying to propagate. And if anything. Actually, things might be very different 50 years from now. If majority of the developed world goes into population decline, I don't know what it will mean. China is also going into population
Nothing.
decline.
It'll just mean that all companies will have India and Chinese CEOs. That's about it. Like it will continue. Man. What is the big deal?
Yeah, but what when very fast, and we spoke about the
Hmm.
power of compounding, very fast, India will also go into population decline, right? I mean, we'll still have an advantage over every other country in terms of numbers, but in absolute
Yeah,
numbers,
you're saying that
yeah,
demographic dividend will pass us by.
that has already passed by. Let's be very clear about that. The fact that we
I
have a
don't
lot of
know,
people
man.
doesn't
Like,
count for much if they have nothing to do. But yeah,
I
that's a
don't
different.
think so. That's not true. I mean, just look at the IPL, for instance, right? Or any of these things.
What does the IPL prove?
The IPL proves that power centers shift based on money, based on population, based on people who are willing to pay to watch a certain thing, right? Otherwise, England was a traditional center of cricket, right? And it no longer is. It probably right now is
Okay,
not even a
fair,
tier one Indian city, right? It is
valid,
where kids are
valid,
extremely hungry to achieve something, probably a
valid.
Ranchi or one of these things.
Valid point. The reason India has become great in cricket, both in terms of the market and in terms of performance and everything, and the money that it generates, is because there was always initiative to try and be good at cricket. It is a field that India tried very hard to be successful at for many, many, many
No,
decades, and
again, this
eventually,
is a
you're right.
classic sign of capitalism winning out, right? Is that the only reason
Yeah, but it
cricket
didn't
became so
happen in a
popular?
vacuum. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. It's because India took steps. Like we,
No,
as
it
the
is
Indian public, was so crazy about the sport, and we tried to be good at it,
no,
right?
I don't. That's not true. What I'm saying is it is a reinforcing loop, right? One was there was the accident of India winning the '83 World Cup out of nowhere, and then TV coming into prominence right then. There is a reinforcing loop which is fed more and more by money itself, and therefore it is a function of both availability of population as well as basically a market is needed for capitalism to thrive, right? and
You're
and that
right.
is why cricket becomes popular.
Before we won the 1983 World Cup, we already had the world's best batsman in our country. We already had the
Yeah, fair.
greatest spin quartet of all time in our country. We
Right.
already had
By the
great
way,
heroes and great stories in our cricket,
what is the national sport of India? Right? It was hockey. I think it still is.
which is fine, right?
Unless it's no. The point is, therefore, then you have to explain why hockey declined in popularity, right?
I don't have to explain anything. What I am trying to say is that what I am trying to say, the reason why I'm saying that demographic dividend is not going to amount to anything is because while we
Yeah.
have the people
Yeah.
alone don't make capitalism happen. You need to have much more going into it. You need to arm those people. You need to educate those people. You need to nourish those
Which is
people.
how markets
You
work.
Yeah, and you need to give them opportunities. India
Correct.
has completely missed the bus on manufacturing. They are not going to catch that bus. It's gone, right? That's what I'm
It's okay,
saying.
man.
You have the people. The people are just one part of that raw material. You have not nourished any other part of that ecosystem to say, hey, and hence, I don't see a demographic dividend happening. There's a different episode, but
My only point is that money needs a market where it can thrive, right? And that is simply why you see it play out in cricket in India, for instance, that this will continue
yeah.
to be the power. I mean, England and Australia are going to fade away, right?
No, that's
Very
fine.
shortly, probably cricket is going to take on the form of one of American franchise sport where
Absolutely.
we don't care about any other country. Let's just
Absolutely.
continue playing here.
I have no
365
doubt
days a
about
year.
that. No, I have no doubt about it. And cricket is a happy, in that sense, a very, very happy thing to have happened to India, right? Where you actually kind of fostered and created excellence over a period of many decades. It's one of the few fields where the country has managed to do that. And it's because
I
a
mean,
lot of things came together, but with a lot of enterprise also. It didn't happen out of the blue. Now, why didn't that happen to hockey is a very complicated question. There are many things that should have happened to hockey, which for some reason didn't happen. So there are a lot of
yeah,
chance events also. Like you said, 1983 was a great chance event that came at the right time, right, for cricket
correct.
and so on. I buy all that. All I'm saying is we are not going to get lucky. Like the reason cricket stands out is because it's an exception, right?
Okay.
Within the
No,
Indian system.
I disagree on like multiple
With,
counts. One is that
uh,
like cricket is not a natural sport that you can play, right? Of course, you can play gully cricket, that is in the other, but it's very different from cricket at the professional level. And the only way to
yeah,
get to play professional cricket is to have professional training set up, right? And the only way to do that is with availability of real estate, availability of money, availability of coaching, all of that, right? basically
Yeah.
money, right? And you have to see a payoff at the end of it so that it becomes attractive to a large enough set of people that it has scale then, and you are able to find more people to play with, and you are able to build large grounds that will have enough people renting it out day on day, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth, right? And therefore it is not just an accident of whatever, it is how markets work.
You're
And
right. I'm not saying it was just an accident. I'm saying a lot of things came together. Enterprise was definitely one of them.
yeah,
And a bunch of many other things came together. All I'm saying is the reason cricket is spoken about so highly in India is because it's a shining exception in a country that has not actually broken through in pretty much most fields.
anyway, this episode is not about cricket. It's probably about money and
Yeah,
capitalism. And I
correct.
mean, I think in the past, whoever has heard of this podcast would probably think of me as an anti capitalist, which is not the case. And one of the reasons that I actually think like capitalism is much better is that capitalism creates two things, right? It creates wealth, but it also creates envy. But let's focus on the
Yeah,
first part for now, and why
yeah,
I think like cricket is a market success more than anything, and why that is a good thing is that
mm,
the larger the company, the more the trust you can put in it, right? And more scrutiny it will have. For instance, if you're thinking of like, something like, is Maggie bad for you, or does it have lead
yeah.
content, or like, should I drink Diet Coke or Coke Zero because they use two separate add mixtures of adding,
Ad mixture.
of
Literally, because
sweetener
they also have two separate ads. So it's actually two
ads.
different
Correct.
ad
Yeah.
mixes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Marketing mixes itself different.
And stuff like that, or think of a Facebook, and is it trustworthy enough, etc., etc. The By virtue of them being large enough, they will invest significantly in the legal teams, right? Hi, Shyam Nagarajan. One of my pet theories is that the moment a company stops becoming cool from a startup is when legal teams get involved, and you have to get legal side of it, everything, right? So
Yeah,
one, you build
yeah,
a large enough legal team to protect the moat that you've built, right?
correct.
Secondly, by virtue of being so big, there are so many people in the public that will call you out, whether it's press or content creators, that this and the other. Thirdly, there are government regulations also.
Yeah,
Same for, like, for instance, Facebook ads. And I, by virtue of having run ads, I know so many players who've come to me saying we can do this, that, and the other. And I'm like, look, isn't it a violation of privacy? And there are no laws around it, right? And therefore there are many possibly rogue apps on your phone that do like dark
yeah.
patterns and like random shit. But a Facebook can never get away with it, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg will be summoned before the Congress. He'll have to sort of exactly explain what happened, that, this, and the other. Therefore, I feel like capitalism is really good because it creates large corporations which you can
Ah, okay.
then broadly trust because they can't get away with it, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm not, at least on this podcast, I'm not going to argue against or for capitalism. You mentioned two things, right, about what capitalism does. You said it helps us accrue wealth, and then you said it also results in envy because
Correct. It creates wealth and envy, right?
it creates wealth and envy, right? I would argue that both of these things are actually not required at all, right? If you think about it, right, go back in time to a time when we were able to go to the top of the food chain. We've gone to the top of the food chain, right? There is no animal that's trying to hunt us. Our food is available plentifully. At this point in time, the world should have ideally gone borderless. Everyone got all the food they wanted, and nobody had to do any work. We actually reached that stage like hundreds of years ago,
Which was
and we
the
chose
hunter gatherer phase.
no, add agriculture also to it, where you're actually producing your food, right? You're able to produce as much food as you want now, right?
Correct.
And there's plenty for everyone. There's more food out there than
Correct.
people who exist and all of that. You could have built a very egalitarian world at that point in time if you hadn't gone into gene hacking with money.
Yeah, but who
Because
wants an
after the,
egalitarian world?
exactly, yeah, good
Yeah,
question.
nobody does.
It's arguable. Yeah, you're right.
I
It's
mean,
arguable
you
that
go
if
live
any
in
other,
Auroville or like, I don't know, Osho's ashram or like one of those places, man. Like even your original point was around gene propagation. Then that way,
yeah,
like if the sex ratio is 50-50, then everyone should have a mate and be happy broadly, right? Statistically,
yeah,
you'll be okay with that. But it's never about that, right? You always want something better than your neighbor. the only reason for the existence of money in that sense is not as a mode of making transactions easier, which it no doubt does. It is as a store of value and a means of funding your purpose, which is really envy and greed, right? The reason you wake up the next
Your
day,
purpose is envy and greed.
yeah, it is fueled by envy and greed. No, again to the point of
Yeah.
thresholds, right? Let us say you're a 3 4 people household. Once you're able to afford a 2 bedroom apartment and have a car that is functional, why would you want to proceed ahead and do more things? Can you not either quit when you reach enough money for the rest of your life to sustain at the same level, or do fewer hours of work and say I am happy at the level that I am? This
No,
doesn't
this is
happen
fine, right?
broadly.
No, I know it doesn't happen. I'm just saying it's interesting that it panned out the way it did, right? You look at another species, and it's not like I've done any scientific research here, but we know that
That is very clear.
tortoises,
That much is very clear.
in case you were wondering, see, we know tortoises live for what, 120 years or something, right? They don't die. While we
They
chose
are
the
the Dunbars. They are the Dunbars
they are
of the
the dun-
animal world.
they are the
They're like,
Dunbars.
we'll do the boring shit, so life seems longer.
We are chilling, man. They're chilling. They have the most peaceful life
Chilling,
ever,
yeah.
right? I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, they live long. Their food is plentiful. They don't exert. They're all chilling. They don't have any envy. I don't think one tortoise envies another tortoise, right? What do you think about this?
Yeah.
And
No, this
I
is true.
I picked tortoises specifically because they seem to be a species that have reached that level of calm.
Is this calm in English or calm in Hindi?
कोई काम नहीं है इसलिए काम हूं मैं. Kachua is tortoise, right?
Kachua, yeah, probably. What
Correct,
is
yeah.
Khargosh? Khargosh is hair. Huh?
Rabbit.
One interesting thing that happened was that when humans reached the Galapagos Islands, right, the turtles there weren't classified for a very long time,
Yeah.
because they were too delicious. And like all of these people, all the turtles they found, they just started eating them apparently. And this is a true story. See, again, capitalism creates wealth and envy, and it needs both of these to feed that feedback loop, right? And unless and until you are craving something more or believing
Yeah.
in something like the American dream, it will never propagate.
Correct.
However, there is a difference that you can draw, which is to say, do you live for social comparison or individual fulfillment, right? And most of society is structured around thinking that you need to live for social comparison, right?
Yeah.
A phone at the end of the day is not just a phone. A car at the end of the day is not just a car. It is also a symbol of status, right?
Yeah.
Basically, you are at all points in time bombarded with ads for a bigger, better, more beautiful life, right?
Yeah.
And you can easily opt out of it. Again, the only way to stay wealthy is to have needs that are lower than how much you make, right? There is no other way. Social comparison is entirely out of our own choosing. If you suddenly became a millionaire and you moved to, I don't know, California or Malibu or one of these places, and you realize that you're actually not even in the top tier there, you would then strive even harder to get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, all of this is fine, right? We know this, right? My only point was
Yeah.
this: we didn't get here overnight. I'm wondering how that first step got taken, right? You spoke about the guy who invented paper money, and maybe it's intrinsic to the fact that man is, a social animal. The fact that we need social validation is because we look at people around us and relate and communicate with people around us in a way that maybe other species don't, and hence all the paths down those probability trees led to this most socially plugged in, extremely intelligent species was eventually going to come up with a structure like capitalism, because that was inevitable.
No, see, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing
I'm not
is
saying whether it's
that
good or bad. I'm not even questioning whether it's good or bad. I'm just asking how it got to this, because the simpler answer, the logical simpler answer would have been that everyone just chills and became
why?
turtles.
Why is it better?
Because people are not killing each other, people are not fighting with each other, people
Yeah,
are not
but
stressing over,
Correct.
Who's leading a
So
happier
you know,
life, right? Is it the tortoise or is it the human being, the average human being?
no.
Is the question.
So then you're questioning whole of Maslow's pyramid, right? And does that hierarchy exist? And I think by virtue of being human, you are given
Exactly.
a big brain that
Exactly.
that is inevitable, right? Once you have your hygiene needs, you go up to more meaningful needs,
I get that.
and actually self-actualization and stuff like that, right? Actually see anyone who makes a lot of money finally going towards philanthropy, right? Bill Gates Foundation solving for that, this and the other, or something else. So the original question that I want to ask was, should you, if you have food on your plate that you don't want to eat, should you eat the full thing or should you throw it away?
You should eat as much as you need to eat.
Correct. But what about the poor kids in Africa?
Law of conservation of food states that I cannot get my food across to Africa right now,
Yeah.
sadly.
No, and again, going back to sunk cost fallacy, right? Like it's not gonna make anybody better. You have to throw it out, and even if you throw it out, food. I'm hoping by and large is biodegradable, unless it's one of those big corporations making patties that are impossible to degrade or something like that, which is not the case. Which means,
The issue, the reason why this question is moot is because, like I said earlier, we have enough food for everyone on this planet many times over. The reason they're
yeah,
not able to eat is not because the food is not available or not accessible. It's because of the way
yeah,
we have structured
distribution.
ourselves. Right. Not even distribution. It's because of money. Right. We have come up with new rules around who gets to eat and who doesn't get to eat. And it has nothing to do with the availability of food. And that's not going to get solved by whether or not I eat what's on my plate. In a
No.
very roundabout way, that problem is not on my plate for me to solve.
And the second part is that, therefore, what happens if you throw it away? Some other organism eats it, right? And if you're
Yeah.
all about saving
Plants
the
are
planet,
also
it is-
living things.
Yeah, plants. Yeah, it goes into the soil, like
Fritz Haber
gets into manure,
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like
Correct.
it really doesn't matter. Like food waste is the last thing you need to worry about. And which brings me to, is philanthropy even a thing, right? Like, are you more noble for investing your money, create social change, as it were, because you've solved the tech problems of the world? Now you can solve fundamental human problems of the world, as opposed to someone else splurging hundreds, thousands of crores on a wedding? In my view, there is no difference between either, right? That's my provocative premise.
There is a difference. I mean, I know where you're coming from. You're saying that both of these are, commercial activities that eventually
Yeah.
end up in redistribution, which is good. And you're saying all
Correct.
redistribution is equal. My argument is all redistribution is not equal. There are
Okay.
people right at the bottom of the pyramid who do not get to participate unless
Yeah.
you create an opportunity like philanthropy for them, through philanthropy for them. Whereas there are
Yeah.
other people who get to participate who are at various stages of the totem pole who might get an opportunity to participate again only because they already have that social capital, right? So
Right.
people who benefit from a wedding, for instance, are not your hungry children in Africa.
Okay.
That's number one. Number two is this, right? Number two is this. Now, when you're trying to create social change, what you're trying to provide is, you're not trying to solve for one square meal. You're not trying to solve for one day or 1 year in somebody's life. You're trying to equip them to be better placed to deal with life, and over a period of time, their generations, right, that follow, to deal with life in a better way than whatever hand they've been dealt right now, right? And
Right.
there's a certain power to philanthropy which can make that happen, as opposed to a commercial activity like a wedding or even a poor feeding, right? Some people do this where they go and feed the poor for one day at a temple. Now that's not going to make any social change. Yeah, that's one square meal, it's good, but it's not going to have lasting impact, like say someone setting up a school or someone dealing with malaria in a certain village in Africa, right, and eradicating it completely. Now that is money better spent,
Yeah.
because it has far more far-reaching implications.
Okay. Two parts to this, right? One is, I'm saying that to me there is no difference between either, because like the whole point of living in a world such as our own, where I'm guessing the technical term is spontaneous order, right? Which is that I don't have to figure out where my milk will come from next morning. I definitely don't have to go and milk a cow, because for someone it is a much better transaction than someone else,
Yeah.
and there will be people who find the way to do it, right? Therefore, if you're talking about rather than hoarding 4,000 crores, splurging it on a wedding,
Yeah.
it actually has the same or better effect on society, because it goes down to people who want things, and therefore there is an entire ecosystem created out of it, right?
I get that.
Maybe the Shamiana guy educates his two daughters more because he's suddenly come into money, that is, and the other, right? It's just that
I
the
hear that.
effects are not readily visible for you. So there is a huge fallacy in this whole thing, is that you look at philanthropy and say, I have to be at the center of it. And that is the essence of
Sure.
philanthropy today, right? It has to have my name on it. And it's
Yeah.
the same way in which, for instance, is that you celebrate your daughter or son's birthday by
Correct.
going to an orphanage and getting them to sponsor
Correct.
one meal or something like that.
It's about you.
And it's about you, right? And
Yeah.
the whole thing around, should you even volunteer for a cause, or should you give money to it, right? Volunteering obviously has the effect of putting you at the center of it. I am taking time out of my this thing to go and do this.
Correct.
Unless it is something that you're specialized in, which is of skill to you. Let us say it is a
Correct.
beach cleaning activity, right? You're probably much better off donating the time, money equivalent of that time, so that more people can get shit done, rather than you being at the center of it, right?
Correct.
Therefore, my point is that
Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Modi ji coming and sweeping. Sir, Modi ji, please, you don't do the sweeping, sir. Somebody first has to come and put the garbage, and then that video will come.
No, actually, this is the edge case of volunteering, where volunteering makes sense if you're a celebrity, because then you can create social change, right?
Interesting.
As opposed to you and me doing it, is that we shouldn't spend our time on it. Rather,
you're a celebrity,
how much do you earn? Hey,
now see,
let's be very clear. I am creating trash in the world. I'm not picking up trash.
Which is what Modi also does. You've seen that, right? Somebody first comes and drops the paper. Celebrities are allowed to do all that. It's okay.
I am suddenly reminded of that video from the Ambani wedding.
Exactly. Ambani is taking food from the plate.
They played it in reverse. Taking laddus.
Taking idlis and laddus. No, I hear you. You're right. Yeah. All I want to say is, firstly, philanthropy is a catch-all term. What I am batting for is social change, right? And whatever little I've read about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they've created lasting impact in places. Now, let's take a simple example, right? One of the reasons Indians who go live in the West, come back to India, or are very happy when they come back to India, is because they have cheap labor available to them, right? And if we look around us in India, you have manual scavenging, right? And you have you have people actually going into drains to clean them up, etc., which is all not done in other parts of the world, which coincidentally are also much cleaner, funnily, right?
True.
So it is not a job that needs to exist, right? And it exists because there is a certain community of people that are so impoverished and have been so downtrodden upon that there's nothing else for them to do. Now, if you can create through your social initiative change in those people's lives, and you take your country to a level where the country cannot actually afford to pay someone to do that job. Currently, you can afford to pay for it because someone is willing to do it for so cheap, right? Now, philanthropy is not going to solve it, but social change will solve for it. And if big corporations are able to put their money, it doesn't matter whether they put themselves or their money or their name, I don't care. But if they're able to do something and create lasting impact, and I do believe that Bill and Melinda Gates is a good example here, because they have created lasting impact in communities where they've pulled people out of misery in simple interventions like health and food and education. Not even simple. These are the ones where you really need interventions. Health, food, education on an ongoing basis. So one meal is not going to do it. So one poor feeding session is not going to cut it. Feeding 1,000 poor people during a wedding is not going to help it. But if you can create this kind of lasting change, it is of value. And I'm glad that Bill Gates is doing what he's doing and not, just splurging all his money on whatever.
Let me just contextualize my argument. To your point that philanthropy is a catch-all term, social change never works at scale, right?
Yeah.
All problems and interventions are always local, right?
Targeted, yeah.
Therefore, there is no tremendous advantage by creating one framework which you can apply everywhere, right? So my question therefore is, let's say Bill and Melinda Gates want to create social change. Is it better for them to create this thing, or give money to existing ground level organizations which already are working towards a change?
they have actually created these organizations. That's what they've done. They've put their money to actually create organizations that do it better than anybody else is already doing. And frankly, it's not something that they do for publicity, at least as far as I know. Even if you're not doing it for publicity, ultimately you're doing it for yourself, right? In
Yeah,
some way,
exactly.
even if you're not going out and talking about it, you're doing it for yourself, which I think
And
is
you
fine.
have a
The world needs that.
I'm not disagreeing, right? But my whole point is that this whole savior complex that exists, right? Like Elon Musk is a classical example to say
Yeah, that's all
I
rubbish.
can solve. Yeah, that is so. Going back to the pyramid, right? You inevitably end up at a place where you're saying that I've done this particular thing, therefore I can do the other thing much better than anyone else can, which is
Yeah.
often the issue, even with someone well-meaning like a Narendra
Correct.
Modi, who probably became a prime minister to bring about social change, is that my ideas work better than others because like I've done X all my life. And then you stop
Yeah.
listening to experts, you stop funding people, you stop funding for science, and there is no feedback loop built in, right?
Correct.
Classical example of something like demonetization coming about as a function of someone
Correct.
who, that's my point, is that
That's all fine. Yeah.
maybe just fund the experts, no, like don't
Megalomania is bad. Let's just put it that way, right?
I would argue that a podcast is a format that actually enables megalomania.
Like I said, right?
If we are not doing this for money, are we doing this for self-actualization? And do we have a savior complex? Nothing. Is it time for us to
Absolutely.
shut down leftover lesson?
I was talking with Shruti this morning, right? And she was asking me whether I would want to read the Blinkist summary of some book. Okay. And I refuted it saying, like, for especially non-fiction, self-help kind of content, Blinkist is the worst kind of way to read. Because it would remove the wow moments, and you only will sort of learn and understand and appreciate what the book is trying to say if you read it and go through that journey of the
Can I
anecdotes
ask
that are
you a
being
question?
spoken. At which point she said, it is, I think Blinkist is as good as something like a self-help podcast. So you especially should not be talking about this because you guys do a self-help podcast. To which I said, yes, we do a self-help podcast for helping each other.
So helping us.
It is to help us. It is to help us.
That's
so
it.
this is our philanthropy. We are doing it for ourselves.
Correct. Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
No, the major benefit that we get out of it is that it's fun for us to do this. That doesn't mean that I won't plug it 7 times a week, right? like that part also exists.
You famously started Catch 22 many times, but finished it only once. Maybe if you had started with the Blinkist summary, you would have started it and finished it at one go. So, yeah. But this week's reading challenge is to go back and reread Catch 22. So hopefully, by the time we do another 30 episodes, I would have actually read it. Given that my reading speed is more in the tortoise.
22 episodes.
22 episodes. Yeah, my reading speed is still tortoise based and not human reading based. So there you go.
Yeah, no, mine's terrible. I think there are at least 5 books that I'm parallelly not reading, right? Right? And this is the line from that poem that doesn't get repeated enough. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, right? It's not like it's not about 2 roads diverge in a yellow wood and I took the one less traveled by. It is about I kept the other for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way. Therefore,
correct.
All this all this thing about revisiting, etc., is slightly specious, which is why which is why there is no destination. It's all random. What you're doing right now is life.
Absolutely.
There is nothing else to it.
Absolutely. By the way, you said specious as a joke, right?
Why? It's
pronounced
is it?
Specious, yeah. But this is interesting that you said specious, and actually without knowing that it's pronounced specious, because I read this somewhere on Twitter that making fun of people for pronouncing things wrong is the silliest thing you can do, because someone who's pronouncing something wrong. Oh, is it? Must be.
No.
But the logic is this, right? This is someone who has actually not come across that term in conversation, but has read it and understood it correctly, and obviously not figured out how it's pronounced, but is able to use it correctly. It's probably the sign of someone very smart. So there you go.
They've read it. And
I'm making a very specious argument that you're a smart guy.
No, I went with Citius, Altius, Fortius, Specious. This was our title for
from Olympics to Ozempic.
Olympics was, and the counter to this, the corollary to this is that if someone misspells highfalutin, it is because they've heard Nitin using that word on the podcast. So they only know how it sounds, they don't know how to spell it. Right? So yeah, podcasts are an equally good way of learning, even if it is like the Blinkist version of learning something. it is still valid. Therefore, don't shame people who misspell or mispronounce things.
Yeah. Super. That brings us to an end of episode 20. Is this episode 20?
Yeah, it's 20. Score.
Amazing. Score. 20 saal baad.
Yeah.
Blinkist and you miss it. 20 episodes.
Bees. Oh, this episode is called Bee Sneeze, is it? Business, money, and
Business. Yeah. Business, money, and Blinkist. Blinkist and you miss it. We are 20 episodes old.
Blinkist and you miss it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to be back maybe next week, maybe in a couple of weeks, but we will be back soon with episode 21. Until then, let your friends know, keep your money safe, propagate your genes, and propagate good tidings about this podcast to your friends as well.
Oh, yeah. Propagate this podcast.
Yeah. That is the true gene, the selfish gene. Bye-bye.